mammoths are staging a comeback. They're turning up everywhere. We've known about them forever. They were the obsession of our very first artists. And now we're getting closer than ever to these tusked titans.
When you smell this, the mammoth almost comes back to life.
Can we get close enough to uncover the truth behind their mysterious collapse?
It's heavy.
Or even resurrect one in the lab?
Would the boy in me like to see a mammoth? Of course.
They conquered the Earth. Why did they disappear? The National Museum of Natural History in Paris was founded in 1793 during the French Revolution. This particular area is called the Evolution Gallery. It's a popular destination for tourists and Parisians alike. But for one man, it's a cathedral. Dick Mol was born in the Netherlands as one of 9 children. He was all of 14 when he dug up his first mammoth fossil.
Ich liebe Fossilien. Es war 1968. Ich war in einer Kiesgrube und dann habe ich meinen ersten Mammutknochen gefunden. Es war ein Oberarmknochen, wunderschön erhalten. Und da habe ich das Fieber für das Mammut bekommen.
After high school, there wasn't enough money for college, so Mol went to work for the Customs Service. While there, he trained to be a specialist in the international endangered species trade. That meant spending a lot of time studying bones. But Mol never lost his boyhood fascination with mammoths. Today, he's known worldwide as Mr. Mammoth, the most professional amateur in paleontology. Scientists from all over the globe contact him routinely to discuss mammoth issues and help with excavations. Throughout his career, Mol has cataloged numerous fossil remains dredged from the bottom of the North Sea. And that's where he is today. He's jumped on board a trawler leaving the Dutch port of Rotterdam en route to the North Sea. His target area is just a few miles offshore, the shipping lanes leading to the inland harbor. Mol is an opportunist. He knows the harbor seabed must be dredged routinely to a depth of over 80 feet to keep the giant cargo vessels afloat. And along with the sea creatures and silt, the dredging often dislodges a treasure trove of Ice Age fossils.
Baumlose Mammutsteppe gewesen war. Und da haben Tausende von Mammuts gelebt. Und ihre Überresten, die können wir aufdredgen.
The trawler's nets comb the ocean floor for about an hour, snagging a variety of stirred-up bony remains. Then Mol and crew start sifting through the catch. Mol has relied on this technique for some 15 years, and with good reason. It works. Today, his Ice Age bycatch features a woolly mammoth vertebrae.
Guck mal, wie wunderschön erhalten. Und so ein Wirbel, so gut erhalten, da sieht man sofort, dass es auch ein erwachsenes und ein älteres Tier gewesen ist. Sagenhaft. Da brauchen wir mehr davon.
It's a good day for Mol, but still, it's another small piece to a very large and complex puzzle. Woolly mammoths roamed the planet for about 250,000 years. The last holdouts vanished from Siberia about 10,000 years ago. What caused the die-off? The story begins at the last ice age, known as the Pleistocene. It began about 1.8 million years ago and lasted until about 11,700 years ago. The continents had already moved to their current positions. Sheets of ice covered large parts of Europe as well as the other continents. The climate was much colder and drier than it is today. Average global temperatures were about 41 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit below today's norms. Most of the water on Earth's surface was frozen. Rainfall was about half of what it is today. Sea levels sank almost 400 feet. Whole bodies of water dried up or froze. The British Isles became part of the continental landmass. One Ice Age feature was an area known as the tundra steppe, a kind of prairie. Steppes are areas too dry to support a forest, but not dry enough to become desert. And they're ideal environments for giant meandering grazing machines. The tundra steppe developed into a mammoth mecca. It stretched across northern Asia, Europe, and into much of North America. But some smaller regions seem like mammoth graveyards. They just keep producing bones. And one of them is the Rotterdam harbor. Mol keeps getting results.
Dat is een onderkiefer van Mammoth.
Along with the mammoth jaw, Mol uncovers a couple of teeth that slip right into place,
M1 en M2. Ja.
and a series of bones, including a leg bone that weighs about 60 pounds. Then Mol hits pay dirt, the tusk of a mammoth bull.
Ja. Wij net nog op de Stoßzahn eines Mammuts. Richtiges Elfenbein, aber 40.000 Jahre alt.
Tusks are like mammoth diaries. They contain a record of the individual's age, health, and diet. Mol will keep a careful eye on this ivory time capsule until he can have it analyzed. For him, it's another bit of evidence in the ultimate cold case. With so many specimens and improved technology, scientists have been able to put together a detailed dossier on these prehistoric pachyderms. They know that the woolly mammoth was the last in a line of supersized ancestors. Here's what happened. The first mammoths rumbled out of Africa about 3 or 4 million years ago. Experts believe that years of drought triggered the migration. No rain meant no food for these hungry herbivores. So the mammoths moved north and eventually occupied most of Eurasia. They were called southern mammoths because the first fossils of one were found in southern Europe. With a shoulder height of roughly 13 feet, the southern mammoths were the group's Goliaths.
Die Füße von einem Mammut sind sehr wichtig. Die erzählen sehr viel über das Tier und vor allem über die Größe. Weil diesen Umriss vom Fuß ist wie ein Fundament von einem Haus. Diese Fußknochen sagen genau aus, wie hoch das Tier gewesen ist, die Schulterhöhe. Hier habe ich zum Beispiel einen Fußknochen vom südlichen Mammut, von der Meeresboden aufgedredscht, ist aber nicht komplett. Da unten fehlt die Gelenkrolle. Dieser Knochen ist genau der gleiche wie dieser hier. Und wenn ich die davor halte, kann man ja sehen, dass dieser Knochen zu einem Tier gehört hat, das noch größer gewesen ist. Das dürfte eine Schulterhöhe gehabt haben von 4,5 Meter und vielleicht ein Gewicht von 12 Tonnen. Das ist schon ein Mammut gewesen.
In the early Pleistocene, about 2 million years ago, a group of southern mammoths took advantage of low sea levels and crossed into North America via the Bering Strait. By the middle of the Pleistocene, a new North American species had evolved, the imperial mammoth. Then, in the late Pleistocene, a new Columbian mammoth split off. Its range covered the present United States and as far south as Nicaragua and Honduras. Meanwhile, back in Eurasia, yet another species of mammoth, the steppe mammoth evolved, a stage post on the way to the final mammoth type. It was here, later in the Pleistocene, that the woolly mammoth made its debut. By mammoth standards, it was pint-sized, but tough enough to cross the Bering Strait and travel as far south as present-day Kansas. Along the way, it developed a multi-layered, weather-resistant outer shell.
The huge animal was covered with fur, and in a lifetime it looks like this. Fur of a woolly mammoth. Fine wool immediately on the skin, and over it, like a raincoat, these long, coarse hairs, giving the animal the real name, woolly mammoth.
And those coats came in many colors. Some were blonde, many reddish-brown, and others almost black. They also carried a signature scent.
When you smell this, the mammoth almost comes back to life. You know exactly how a mammoth smelled like.
At their peak, woolly mammoths had managed to evolve and populate 3/4 of the globe. Along the way, there had been plenty of adaptations, but the fundamental building blocks remained the same. When its DNA was mapped in 2008, it showed that the woolly mammoth and the African elephant are 99% identical. Pregnant elephant females have a 2-year gestation period, so 2 years in the womb and 2 more years before weaning meant mammoths, like elephants, could produce a new calf about every 4 years. And since the woolly mammoth was roughly the same size as its modern elephant cousins, it's easy to envision how it spent its days. African elephants spend 16 to 18 hours a day either feeding or moving toward a source of food or water. They can consume up to 660 pounds of food and 40 gallons of water a day. And after all of that intake, they unload up to 400 pounds of dung per day. Mammoths were herbivores, surviving on a purely plant-based diet of mainly grass and sedges. Other animals benefited from the mammoth's big appetite. They not only grazed the steppe, they fertilized it and provided easy meals for other creatures down the food chain. But they left more than dung behind. Over the years, tens of thousands of mammoth molars have been found. Most are wisdom teeth, and it turns out there's wisdom in those wisdom teeth. By following the teeth trails, scientists have been able to trace the migratory paths of different mammoth species. In fact, the only reliable way to identify the different mammoth species is by the number of enamel ridges on their molars. Early mammoths had few ridges. As new species evolved, the number of ridges increased to grind up a wider variety of vegetation.
Woolly mammoths got 6 molars on each side of their jaws during lifetime. These molars had high crowns and lots of these thin enamel plates or lamellae to grind down the tough grasses of the mammoth steppe. When the last tooth was worn away, that was the end. The animal starved.
Like their elephant cousins, mammoths were social animals. They traveled the steppe in herds, led by an alpha female. Alongside the alpha female, younger females, calves, and young bulls formed the rest of the herd. Adult mammoth bulls patrolled the Ice Age steppe as loners. They could weigh up to 5.5 tons each and reach a shoulder height of nearly 10 feet. They looked similar to African elephants today, except for their tusks, which were much longer and grew in a spiral pattern. Mammoths used their tusks to dig for food, but more often they functioned as weapons used to intimidate or gore predators and rivals. The tusks featured dramatic curves and could easily be up to 16 feet long. And they're still turning up. Sometimes people digging for something else find themselves face to face with a mammoth. And when they do, Dick Mol wants to be there. Northern Canada, the Yukon River Valley. Mammoth hunter Dick Mol is headed to Dawson City, the famed center of the Klondike Gold Rush. Dawson lies at the confluence of the Yukon and Klondike rivers. The gold rush began in 1896 and lasted a brief 3 years. But during those years, men chasing their fortunes dug up much more than gold. They harvested huge mammoth bones and tusks from the permafrost. The area was likely an Ice Age thoroughfare on the way to North America. But for a lot of mammoths, it was a final stop. Today, the city operates like a gold rush theme park and caters mostly to tourists. Mol is here to work with Dr. Grant Zazula, the Yukon State paleontologist. Zazula knows the area and the people. He'll be Mol's guide as well as his colleague on this trip. The search for gold hasn't disappeared. As long as the price stays high, a few diehards will keep toughing it out, hoping for the big payout. First up is local mine owner Bernard Johnson. He's a fossil hunter as well, and more than happy to show his collection.
Oh, look at this.
And his gold to the experts.
Real gold.
That's real gold.
That's from your
Can
mine.
I touch it?
Wow.
Well, now. Here, you can feel the weight of it.
Wow.
That's huge.
And heavy, I can tell you.
Really heavy. Wow.
But you have more than this, I guess. Ah. Oh, wow. This is what I like to have in my hands. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Start.
Oh, this is a good one. You find this yourself?
Yes.
Long time ago.
So where's the rest of the bone?
Eaten.
Wow.
The next stop is a bit less pleasant. Mining has become a highly mechanized industrial process. This form is called hydraulic mining. The miners use high-pressure jets of water to dislodge rocks and move sediment. Then they hose the muck through the sluice boxes to sift the gold. One distraction is the foul smell of the sludge. All the plants and animals that died and froze in the ground are now starting to thaw. Zazula initially set out to study Arctic people, the first humans to cross into North America.
Oh, wow.
But along the way, he became more interested in the environments those first people encountered. So he switched gears and started fossil hunting. And this is where the action is.
It's a horse skull, preserved in the muck. Beautiful.
It looks entirely complete.
An Ice Age horse skull.
Okay. Slowly, slowly.
Yes.
And an Arctic ground squirrel, still in its nest.
This nest is exciting too because it's not just a nest, it also has seeds that were cached by the Arctic ground squirrel. So as part of their spring ritual, when they wake up from hibernation, they need to eat a lot of material. So they cache seeds in the fall, and then they go to hibernate.
This is the tibia.
Oh, wow.
Here you go, Dick.
Oh, there's more limb bones too. Oh. Here we go, we got a part of the hand. Oh, it's almost a complete hand and it's still articulated. There must be soft tissue preservation.
Such a beautiful animal.
Yeah. There's
So well preserved.
look at that beautiful skull.
Well, this nest has an incredible amount of information preserved in it. We have grasses, we have seeds and plants from the Mammoth steppe, but we also have a victim of the Ice Age. This is an Arctic ground squirrel that just didn't have what it takes to survive those harsh, cold conditions 30,000 years ago. And obviously, the skeleton indicates that it didn't survive hibernation and it died within its nest.
Meanwhile, Zazula's colleague, Elizabeth Hall, has stumbled on a remarkable find. In the middle of a shallow stream, a mammoth bull tusk.
Holy! It's heavy.
You want to get it up? Wow. Yeah, wow, that's amazing that you spotted this, because I haven't seen many other fossils at this site, so this is quite an impressive find for this locality.
Look here. Dieser Mammutzahn enthält sehr viele Geschichten vom Tier, zu dem es jemals gehört hat. Und dieser Zahn kann ich vergleichen mit Zähnen, die wir vom Nordseeboden gedreht haben. Und dann sowas zu finden und das zu fühlen, näher kann man nicht an einen Elefanten kommen. Okay, put it on my shoulder and I will carry it.
Sure, you got it?
Oh yeah, even it's 50 kilos of ivory.
Okay.
I got it. Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Hold on, we'll meet you there.
Okay, see you.
Are you all right?
Oh yeah, I'm happy.
Okay, that's heavy.
This is Dick Mol's second tusk find. It's time to have the North Sea tusk and this new one from Canada analyzed. What kind of mammoths were they? How old were they when they died? How did they die? These questions and many others will be considered by this man, Dr. Daniel Fisher. He's an evolutionary biologist at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. 30 years and hundreds of tusks later, he's now considered the world's leading expert on them. The first step is to cover the tusk in a protective plastic wrap. Next, the tusk goes into a custom-built wooden form. Fisher applies an expanding foam to hold the tusk tightly in place. Then he guides it through the saw's blade. Tusks are modified incisors that grow continuously in layers throughout the animal's life. Fisher has discovered that these layers can be built in yearly increments like the rings of a tree. They can also record trauma and other profound life events, such as a young male reaching sexual maturity around its 12th year. At that time, the mammoth is driven away from its herd by its mother. Tusk marks can show signs of the brutal must battles that adult males wage to determine who could mate. Fisher found marks in the layers at the root of the tusk that revealed how the animal had died, whether it was illness, injury, environmental stress, or sudden death.
Yeah, it's good years in there.
It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm tempted to go farther away or come closer together. A tusk like this grows essentially by formation of conical layers of dentin that form one inside the other from the tip of the tusk toward the base. So each of these large V-like structures that you see is a body of material, of dentin, of ivory, that formed during approximately 1 year of the animal's life. The dark layers here that represent winter, and the lighter layers that represent spring and summer. We do have a sequence of approximately 20 years in this part of the tusk, from maybe the mid-teens of this animal up into, let's say, early mid-30s or something like that.
Fisher was able to establish that the Yukon bull's imposing tusk likely belonged to a healthy mammoth, but he couldn't decipher its age because the tip and the root of the tooth, the oldest and youngest parts, are missing.
And then we're into the early 20s maybe here.
The North Sea tusk was intact, so Fisher could determine its owner was around 20 years old at the time of death. And there was more.
We noticed something interesting, And that you can see as this gap, which looks at first just like a fracture. This is not a post-mortem, even post-depositional fracture. This is a fracture that formed while the animal was alive. This fracture could have become a grave discomfort for the animal, possibly even a reason for its health to decline and eventually for it to die.
Under the microscope, Fisher discovers an unusual pattern in the tusk. During the course of several summers, the tooth grew very slowly.
So you'd think that would be a good time to add on tusk. But consistently at that part of the year, we see a reduced tusk growth rate. And that's something that we already have documented in mature males when they go into this season called must, which is the mating season. During that time, it's normal to stop eating. And so the tusk growth rate goes down when the reproductive season comes on. And then at the end of, say, 2 to 3 months, the animal reverts to normal condition, tusk growth rate goes back up again, and all is well with the world.
One problem with interpreting mammoth tusks is that they almost never come with mammoths attached, so there's no proof that the tale the tusks tell is accurate. That was until 2007. On a May morning on the Yamal Peninsula in northwestern Siberia, a reindeer herder discovered a petite corpse. Other than the missing hair and toenails and the damage she sustained after her discovery, her only flaw was a dent in her face, just above her trunk. Not bad for 37,000 years on ice. She was named Lyuba, after the reindeer herder's wife. Here was Fisher's chance to prove his tusk timeline theory. Milk tusks grow from gestation through the time in the womb, almost 2 years. By examining her teeth, internal organs, and stomach contents, Fisher could compare what her tusks said with the corresponding forensic evidence. Lyuba's premolars and tusk revealed that she had been born in the late spring and was only a month old when she died. A CT scan of Lyuba showed traces of sediment in her trunk, throat, and bronchial passages. This suggested that she died after inhaling mud and suffocating. The CT evidence suggested an accidental death, a life of good days coming to an abrupt end. The scenario matched the one Fisher had read in her tusks. It was the proof he was looking for. And another step forward in the quest to find out what triggered the extinction. The Etosha Pan is a large dry lake bed within Etosha National Park, one of Namibia's largest wildlife parks. The pan is mostly dry, but during the rainy season, it will acquire a thin layer of water. And sometimes, the flooding waters sweep mud away and expose mammoth fossils. Very little is known about these enormous African ancestors, so anytime there's a find here, it's particularly exciting news. A team has been waiting patiently for the water to recede enough to excavate. Now that it's shallow enough to dig, Mol is on his way. Mol will work with Dr. Martin Pickford, a paleoanthropologist, and his team.
Oh, look, there's a rib over there, and there's one over there, you see? 1, 2, and there's a big bone here, look. This one, oh, look here. This is nice, and look, it's cracked, but I think when we plaster jacket it...
The femur, pelvis, vertebral column, heading that way, eh?
The rib lies completely exposed on the ground. It's easy to piece together.
Yeah. Also, we will face a couple of busy days in getting all of this out.
Yeah.
But it's exciting in anatomical position. This is quite unique.
Can you imagine if you dug here, how much you might find?
It's a promising start for the scientists. Tonight they'll devise a plan and return tomorrow at daylight. The next day, the team lays out a grid to record the exact position of each mammoth fossil. Only then can the dig begin.
Ein Experte sieht sofort, dass das ein Oberschenkel ist. Kann sagen, ob es ein männliches oder ein weibliches Tier ist. Kann auch sagen, wie alt das Tier gewesen ist, also gestorben ist. Weil die Gelenkkugel ist oben noch da dran. Und das bedeutet ein sehr altes Tier. Und ich habe natürlich Tausende von Knochen in aller Welt ausgegraben. Aber auf die Wiege zu sein, wo die Mammuts entstanden sind, auf dem afrikanischen Kontinent, das ist doch ganz was Besonderes. Und ich liebe das. Das ist für mich eigentlich ein bisschen emotionell.
The bone is carefully cast in plaster. Then wrapped for transport. Not far away, there's another find.
You want to come close to a mammoth?
It's the tip of a tusk.
This is really nice. Beautiful. Yeah. Feel the tip, Martin.
Yeah, I can feel it. Smooth, eh?
It's so smooth.
Yeah.
Was sehr interessant ist an dieser Fund, wir können hier auf diese polierte Seite die Schriegellinien, die Wachslinien vom Elfenbein, kann man mit dem Sonnenlicht sehr gut erkennen. Sowas, das sieht man normalerweise nur unter dem Mikroskop.
As they reconstruct the ancient skeleton, a portrait of the ancestral mammoth begins to take shape. It seems to have a longer body than its more evolved counterparts. It has straighter tusks and larger ears. Mammoth extremities, like ears and tails, became much smaller over time to withstand the brutal cold. But along with the mammoth fossils, the remains of tortoises and flamingos suggest a habitat far different from that of today.
We've got 23 species of vertebrates, including tortoises, flamingos. We've got a nice flamingo bone here. Yeah? It's one of the leg bones. Yeah? But we also get a lot of catfish. This is the skull of a catfish. And here we're talking about a fish that would be 1 meter long. This area now is steppe. It's just grass with a few bushes. But 4 million years ago, we had palm trees growing here and big trees. And that would be the food for the mammoth. So that mammoth was living in a woodland environment, much more humid than it is today here.
And so the Great Migration began, and with it, the kinds of adaptations required to survive global climate change. At the same time, the growing human population was on the move. They had a healthy respect, almost a reverence for their woolly allies. But they weren't alone on the icy steppe. Other big herbivores, like the woolly rhinoceros, grazed nearby. The giant rhino weighed about as much as a car and featured an intimidating 4-foot horn. The steppe bison was just about the size of the woolly mammoth, with horns reaching up to 5 feet. All the giant herbivores, along with the prehistoric humans, were kept busy fending off predators like saber-toothed cats. The American species had canines 11 inches long. The cave lion was also widespread. It was nearly 4 feet taller than its current relatives, the biggest cats in Africa. The University of Tübingen in Germany is home to one of the most important discoveries of Ice Age artifacts in Europe. Found in the Swabian Alps in 1931, it's the small figure of a mammoth carved into mammoth ivory some 40,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest figurine artworks on Earth. The artist's details are still visible.
Über den gesamten Körper ziehen sich Ritzungen, hauptsächlich Kreuzmarkierungen, und das Stück besitzt außerdem zwischen Vorderbein und Hinterbein jeweils eine Durchlochung, also Ösen. Das heißt, das Stück ist mit Sicherheit als Anhänger getragen worden, hatte eventuell Amulettfunktion und eventuell wurde es von einem Träger zum nächsten weitergegeben.
Ice Age artists even portrayed the act of ivory carving.
Die geistige Leistung, die dahinter steht, sich dieses Stück tatsächlich vorher in diesen massiven Stoßzahn hineinzudenken und dann das Gesehene in der Natur wahrgenommene und Beobachtete in Mammutelfenbein umzusetzen. Das ist einfach unglaublich faszinierend, dass den Menschen dies gelungen ist, dass man wirklich sagen kann, okay, die Menschen haben alles ganz genau gesehen, beobachtet und dann war es ihnen ein Bedürfnis, das dauerhaft festzuhalten.
There's evidence that humans sometimes hunted mammoths for food and made good use of the leftovers. Their bones made sturdy tent poles. And with little wood available in the grassy steppe, mammoth scraps could be burned as fuel. These images of woolly mammoths scratched on slate are 15,500 years old. They seem like rough sketches, yet they include the signature features of a mammoth, its shaggy coat, and the distinctive sloping back. But cave art also suggests that Ice Age humans were justifiably wary of mammoths. In this scene, hunters have killed a reindeer and have enough meat to feed their clan for several days. But a bull blocks their way back to camp. Knowing that mammoths are quick to defend themselves, the humans think better of disturbing the megabeast and decide to wait it out. For many thousands of years, humans and mammoths lived side by side. Then, about 13,000 years ago, more than 3/4 of the large Ice Age animals, including woolly mammoths, died out. For years, scientists have debated the cause of the extinction, with both of the major causes, human overhunting and climate change, insufficient to account for such a mega die-off. Recent research suggests that an extraterrestrial object, possibly a comet about 3 miles wide, may have exploded over southern Canada, nearly wiping out all Stone Age culture as well as mammoths. One thing is certain, the onset of the warm period made their lives difficult. Dark skies and rain signaled the end of the golden age of the mammoth steppe. In Europe, the mammoth's home was forever changed. Higher precipitation patterns in summer and winter caused forests to grow and spread. Other animals adapted to these new conditions, but without abundant grass, the mammoths faltered. As they were driven further north, a damp tundra began to replace the dry mammoth steppe. Gradually, the animals died out, first in West and Central Europe. For thousands of years, Siberia remained their only refuge. The last surviving population lived on remote Wrangel Island off the coast of northeast Siberia. They finally disappeared around 3,700 years ago, when the Great Pyramids were already 1,000 years old. But they didn't disappear without a trace. Far from it. In 1901, the Bersoka mammoth, an adult bull, was uncovered in the Siberian permafrost. Its leg was broken, likely the result of a fall. The highlight of the find was that the remains of its stomach were intact.
Sometimes we found mammoth flesh. Not fossilized, but mummified, because, you know, it was cold and dry at the mammoth steppe. And you know, there are stories that people have eaten this flesh, that they fried it up. But I don't believe in these stories. You know, it doesn't look too good at all. It's not appetizing. And you know, oh, it stinks.
It may stink, but it's like gold to geneticists in search of DNA. Over 100 years later, in 2002, another Siberian mammoth surfaced and caused a stir. It took Dick Mol's team 3 excavation trips together and put the Yukon fossil together. The Yukon mammoth's permafrost tomb preserved its head, tusks, front legs, and part of its stomach and intestinal tract. It was covered with skin and very well preserved. It even had a complete ear. Mol and his team were able to determine that the Yukon mammoth was an old male that once stood over 9 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed 4 to 5 tons. Researchers were now able to confirm that woolly mammoths walked on their toes and had large fleshy pads behind the toes. The soles of their feet were cracked to help grip the rough terrain. But in the end, the team was still unable to determine the cause of his death. His molars were heavily worn, indicating that he may have starved during a stressful winter. Unable to keep going, he hunkered down in a hollow and froze. Then in 2013, Russian scientists were back in Siberia. This time they hit the jackpot. A frozen woolly mammoth in such good condition, it still contained tissue. And blood. Physiologists at the University of Aarhus used the Jarkov mammoth's hemoglobin to conduct temperature experiments. They discovered that while most mammals need a high body temperature for hemoglobin to function, the woolly mammoth was different. Even at near-freezing temperatures, the mammoth's hemoglobin still kept oxygen-rich blood flowing to its extremities.
And this radically reduces its energy requirements. During the winter especially, when it'd be dark 24 hours a day, the plants that they eat are dead and senesced and of very low nutritional quality. So this was a key component of their survival.
The news of mammoth blood made headlines, and the conversation quickly turned to the subject of cloning. Were we now ready to try and clone a woolly mammoth?
We can get the DNA sequences from these extinct species and have bacteria make the exact protein that would have been found in that mammoth, 43,000 years ago. So in a sense, it's like a time travel machine where we can go back in time and take a blood sample from a mammoth.
So far, scientists have been successful in a handful of interspecies cloning projects involving closely related species. But DNA is fragile and must be stored at low temperatures and uniform humidity to stay intact. A mammoth carcass may look well preserved and even ooze blood like goo, but it has to have enough DNA to recreate the mammoth genome in order to clone it. Another method suggests genetically modifying a modern elephant. That means turning an elephant into a kind of mammoth. Biotechnicians take the genome of a modern elephant and add mammoth genes to produce mammoth features. The first genes to be altered would be those of cold-resistant hemoglobin. Mammoth DNA can be inserted into the exact place on an elephant genome to make the elephant hairier, fatter, and more mammoth-like. Then, insert the new genome into an elephant egg, and a mammoth-like creature would be born. So far, all efforts to clone a woolly mammoth have failed. The ancient DNA is too fragmented. But there's still enough usable DNA for the scientists at McMaster University in Canada to study mammoth history. They use slices of mammoth bone from Siberia. A bone fragment contains enough raw material to reconstruct mammoth DNA. And this tiny transparent drop contains millions of genetic fragments. A high-performance DNA sequencer reads the individual DNA pieces and fills in the missing information. And there have been some surprising results.
We've focused on now the southern mammoth species, which is, of course, the North American Columbian, which was, of course, larger than the woolly, and has always been considered from paleontology as two distinct species. And what the DNA seems to show so far is that there's actually a very tight connection between the two. In fact, it looks like large male Columbian mammoths were mating with female woolly mammoths, probably outcompeting the smaller woolly males.
As fond as they are of mammoths, the experts at McMaster think cloning would be a mistake.
I have a hard time understanding the real point of bringing back a woolly mammoth. Would the boy in me like to see a mammoth? Of course. I mean, we'd all like to see these extinct animals, but the problem is there's no real surrogate climate for them currently. You can't bring a single individual back. You need to bring back hundreds to have a breeding population.
Just like today's elephants, mammoths were highly social animals. They needed contact with their own species to flourish. And what of its lost world? Its real home, the Mammoth Steppe, disappeared with the end of the Ice Age. cloned mammoths would likely languish in a zoo, completely dependent on humans.
I do think there's some benefit to it. If de-extinction brings attention to the extinction events that happened and what is looming because as humans we continue to encroach on land, then I think it's been successful in that sense. Success to me doesn't mean I open up the curtain on a stage and there's a little woolly mammoth running around. That's not, I wouldn't call that success. That's a park, right? It's an exhibit at a zoo, which I don't think many people would want to see.
Mammoths were the giants of the Ice Age. They conquered the world at a time of turbulent climate change and continued to adapt to it. Countless finds demonstrate their unprecedented success. Perhaps one day, their bones will complete the story of their mysterious disappearance. Until then, Dick Mol and his colleagues will keep looking and keep digging.